committee meeting. If approved by council at that future meeting, a notice will be circulated to all that have registered with an appeal period identified. So this evening we have one public hearing. The hearing is for the purposes of considering the draft Beamsville GO Transit Station Secondary Plan, Report PL 18-12. This will be presented by Patty Kennedy from Dillon Consulting and Diana Morelli from the Niagara region. The secondary plan will encourage and support the creation of a complete sustainable community that provides a mix and range of employment, commercial, and residential land uses, including a diverse range of housing options, local services, and community infrastructure, which will provide an attractive and accessible public spaces for the pedestrian experience. Call upon Patty and Diana to present and provide information for committee and for members of the public present.
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Is that good? Can folks in the back hear me? Is that loud enough? Good. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here this evening. We have a short presentation to kind of give you the highlights of the secondary plan and hit some of the sort of the high points. Before I get into that, I do want to say we've had an incredible amount of feedback and engagement through this process, and we'd like to say thanks to the members of the public and business owners who've contributed and attended these events, and we're looking forward to hearing comments this evening and making any further changes and tweaks to the plan that need to be made. The plan that we're presenting tonight is a draft plan, so this is sort of an opportunity to continue to try and strengthen and improve that plan. So to take a step back, this plan, as a way of reminder, why are we doing this? How did we get here? In 2011, GO Transit completed an environmental assessment, the Niagara Service Expansion EA study, and in that document they identified the opportunity for a future transit station in Beamsville. That station, that EA was approved, and the province is now in the middle of sort of executing and rolling out that EA. The station in Beamsville, however, was not, there's no formal commitment from the province to fund that station at this time. And so what we've been doing in the last year and a half is working proactively, myself with the region and the town and others, to kind of proactively plan the land uses, the transportation, the infrastructure around the station area, so that we can have the overall goal of strengthening the business case for that station. If you're following the media, you'll know that the funding for these transit stations is somewhat competitive, and the places that have the more compelling business cases for those stations are the ones that get built. So the secondary plan that you have in front of you is going to help strengthen that case for Metrolink. So this is just a context map. This is the Beamsville future station is one of the 4 stations in Niagara and part of the rail expansion. To take a further step back, just to put this, some of the principles around the secondary plan into context, a lot of municipalities around the Greater Golden Horseshoe are leveraging this provincial investment in transit funding, and the future provincial investment in Beamsville gives us this opportunity to proactively plan the land use, the transportation, the infrastructure around the station, so that when growth happens, you're ready for it. Now, that's sort of from the town's perspective. From the province's perspective, they do expect you to plan proactively. They have a document called the Growth Plan, and that lays out some directions for municipalities to follow when they're planning around transit station areas. They direct municipalities to plan for intensification around transit station areas, and that recognizes this important function that the station has. It's not just intended to serve people coming out of the town and jumping on the train, but it's intended to serve people living and working around the station area. So there's an expectation that the town can set as priorities for what intensification looks like around the station area. Now, from a process perspective, there's sort of 6 broad phases in the study process. We're in the final phase of it, phase 6. We initially did some background work, some visioning. We had a draft secondary plan. We did a transportation and traffic study to understand the impacts of what future growth in the station could have on the surrounding road network. We did some initial concept development on what the station could look like, and we are now here at the sort of public event series 4, which is the statutory public meeting. To just give you some highlights on the engagement side, the region and the town worked together to do quite a bit of engagement. There's an online survey, Facebook ad, personalized postcards, posters, regular posts on Facebook and Twitter, email notifications, as well as these face-to-face meetings. We've had 3 formal public events so far, which is more than required under the Planning Act, and the numbers in attendance are shown there. There's over 135 people signed in at these events, and the attendance is probably higher than that because not everybody tends to sign in, or sometimes people come in 2s and 3s. So it was, if you attended the event, you'd know they were quite busy, and a lot of folks came out to comment on the plans. This map is what the current land use is around the station area in Beamsville. You see in orange a dotted outline of the footprint of the future GO station. This is the footprint from the EA. It's a quite sizable footprint there, and the current land uses around the station are designated for a mix of industrial uses, freestanding commercial uses, and further to the south of Green Lane, low-density residential. The brown that you're seeing, those are agriculturally designated lands. They're outside the urban area, so the agriculture in the Greenbelt plan, and they're not going to change as long as the Greenbelt is the way it is. So the focus of the secondary plan is really on the lands in the urban area around that sort of orange footprint, and that's, as I said, what the current plan is. The objectives of the plan are listed here. They're sort of the principles and sort of provide a bit of basis for some of the policies in the secondary plan. And we wanted to plan for redevelopment along Green Lane in close proximity to that future transit station area. Along with that, we wanted to improve the streetscape and the pedestrian realm along Ontario Street, as well as Green Lane as well. There's a plan to improve those street environments. Those industrial lands are designated for employment uses, and through a secondary plan process, you can't change it. You can't move from an employment use to a non-employment use at this type of plan. That's something that can only be done when the region updates its plan. So we wanted, for purposes of now, we wanted to protect those employment functions and try to attract some new transit supportive investment into those employment areas, as well as improve the connectivity and to the station area, whether it's active transportation or people coming by car or walking and that kind of thing. One of the key principles of the plan is to protect the established, stable residential neighborhoods that are to the south of Green Lane. Now, those areas are not targeted for intensification. That's not an area of change. We certainly heard that loud and clear through our public engagement exercises. This is just a visualization. I think you've seen this before previously when Diana was here. It's just an illustration of, you know, in best case scenario, if the policies of the plan are applied, and this is the kind of thing that you could see in 25 or 25 plus years in the fullness of time, as it were, where you could see some mixed use development at the corner of Ontario and Green Lane, some streetscape improvements, sort of those active transportation networks and that sort of thing. So the proposed land use plan, the key changes from a land use planning perspective is that the industrial area, we were proposing to have a more limited range of uses and focused on perhaps higher density office and commercial uses around the station area. To the north of the tracks, to the south of the tracks, you would see that the opportunity in pink there to go from what is currently commercial permissions to a mixed use permission to sort of allow for some ground retail and upper story residential uses in close proximity to the transit station area. And that along Ontario Street, there's some medium density designations as well, just further in proximity to Green Lane. This schedule in the plan shows the maximum intended building heights, so it's a helpful thing to have in the plan so that you can kind of say what you think is the appropriate level of height around the station area. The majority of the height is concentrated in that block on Green Lane, in between the station and Green Lane there, the purple block with a maximum of 10 stories. Most of the other areas in pink are a maximum of 6, and the light purple being 3 stories. Now this map, I sort of mentioned we did some transportation analysis originally when we did the exercise. This map shows some of the proposed longer-term transportation improvements that could be required. The big one being a secondary access to the GO station. We do think that the access that was in the EA originally along the rail corridor isn't going to be workable, and that you'll probably need to plan for second access. So the secondary plan just protects a couple of options, and when there's a commitment on the design, that can be implemented at a later date and further studied. There are a series of geometric improvements at Ontario Street and the South Service Road, as well as some intersection improvements at Green Lane and Ontario. And those are sort of the main improvements required to accommodate the plan. Through the course of this exercise, we also heard a lot of feedback on Lincoln Avenue and the need to improve that street as well. In the fullness of time, as most of you know, it's a pretty narrow street condition. This map, I'm not going to go through too much detail, but it kind of captures a whole bunch of things. It's intended to show some of those public realm improvements. So the purple icons are new public spaces. If the properties on the north side of Green Lane and south of the station area redevelop, we want to reserve a space there for a new public space. You see the hatching to denote some streetscape improvements along Ontario and Green Lane, and some new active transportation connections to sort of help provide opportunities for different modes to get to the station area. And this schedule kind of highlights those active transportation improvements as well, with a series of different active transportation connections to the station. From an implementation perspective, there's a couple of things to point out. The secondary plan does have a recommended capital improvement plan in it, and it does provide a direction for future investments. So all those things that you saw on the map have a specific recommendation for future capital improvement. The point is, though, the timing and the decision for when those happen is in your hands. You decide that at your capital planning phase. It's simply been highlighted in the plan, and a number of these items get picked up through your development charges process as well. So the next steps really are to listen tonight and hear the comments and see what additional changes we may need to make to the plan, and then we'll make some updates and be back in front of council, hopefully with a plan for your adoption at a later date, and then they'll be back in front of the region for approval later. So that concludes our presentation. We're happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions from committee at this time? Seeing none, thank you so much.
Thank you.
At this point, I would like to call upon those who have requested to speak this evening tonight at the public hearing. We have Terry Johns of T. Johns Consulting Group Limited to speak with regards to report PL 18-12. Terry, please come forward.
Good evening. Terry Johns, T. Johns Consulting. I'm here this evening representing Court Holdings, a longtime family business in the town of Lincoln. Within the study area this evening, they actually own a number of properties, but I'm here this evening focusing on the 38 acres, which is the lands that are planned for the transit station area. I wanted to let you know on behalf of Court Holdings, we're in fact very supportive of this plan. We're excited to see these opportunities happening in the town of Lincoln. Throughout the process, we've been working with both Patty with Dylan, regional staff, and your senior planning staff, as well as Mike, and we're excited by opportunities. What I'd like to do this evening, though, is just highlight two areas that we've been speaking to staff about. We met with Kathleen and Matt on Friday to go through these. The first one I would say is more of a housekeeping item. When Patty had up the map, known as B3, which is the land use schedule, the yellow area denoted the transit station area. And we know that Metrolinx hasn't made any commitment on what lands are required. But you could see the substantial nature of that area on the Court Holdings 38 acres. Our request this evening is, in fact, that a designation be underlaid in that area, being the office commercial. And what this does is provide the landowner an assurance that once that final area comes out, there is a clear understanding of what the intended land use is for the remaining lands. So as I say, I call that more of a housekeeping item, and we've chatted with staff about that. The second item, the 38 acres is intended, as Patty noted, it is employment lands, and the change to office commercial we're completely supportive of. We also think there's an opportunity here to also look at a policy introduction that in fact recognizes in the future there may be an opportunity for some mixed use. We recognize they are employment lands. We're not asking for a change to the designation as per B3, but we are saying to you this is a perfect opportunity and a framework to set some future considerations for the 38 acres. They're a large property. There is opportunity to set mixed use away from the existing industrial along Ontario Street. The policy can read such that the G6 ministry guidelines are met, employment lands are still met, there can be other opportunities. So in summary, those are the 2 points that I just wanted to put onto the record this evening for your consideration. Again, we're very supportive of this plan. We believe it represents great go-forward development for the town of Lincoln. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer those.
Thank you very much, Terry. Are there any questions from committee? Councillor McPherson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to clarify the 38 acres, so the proposed GO station is, I'm assuming it's within those 38 acres?
Yes, it is, sir.
So how much would be left after the GO station is built?
I believe at this time, I understand that the acreage is anywhere from 9 to 11 acres that's being set aside.
So most
Of
of
the
it
38.
would be the GO station, most.
Yes, we're pushing for an answer and for less, but we don't have anything yet.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions from committee? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next this evening, we have John Armstrong, representing Masonry Works, to speak to report PL 18-12. John, please come forward.
Thank you very much. It's good to be back here at Town Hall, and it's my privilege to be speaking to you at the Planning Committee. My name is John Armstrong, and I'm here on behalf of Masonry Works. Masonry Works is a professional association representing Ontario's brick, block, and stone sector. We're the manufacturers, contractors, and suppliers who make up Ontario's masonry sector. But as many of you know, we also work with municipalities to help them build to a higher standard by making recommendations for official plans, secondary plans, and urban design guidelines. I only have a couple of comments here today, so I won't take up a ton of your time. As someone who lives here in Beamsville, I think it's fair to say that we're all very excited about the GO train extension. This really has the potential to for some terrific new and exciting development, and really promises to link Beamsville into the broader GTA. Certainly, regardless of whether or not it's fully been approved for this particular station. The GO station area itself has some tremendous potential to really be a remarkable new district in Beamsville, and we can certainly see that there's a lot of that thinking that's been reflected in the secondary plan that's in front of us today, and we'd like to commend staff and council for that mindset, particularly the vision of the way you're moving you're using this opportunity to redevelop Ontario Street. You've included design guidelines for the private realm in the document, and needless to say, we share your vision of that approach. We know that Metrolinx sticks firmly to the idea of mobility hubs, and that Metrolinx actually has a set of placemaking guidelines for mobility hub areas, that is, areas around key transit stations. One of the things they strongly recommend is high quality building exteriors and materials reflective of the urban setting. Their take on development is that the private space extending from the facade to the public right-of-way must blend seamlessly with the public realm. The way we look at it, the facade of buildings isn't just a private thing. The exterior cladding and design is really the interface between the public and the private realm. Metrolinx and the province also talk a lot about the importance of higher density in transit hub areas, and you've reflected that in your document. But materiality is also really important when you talk about density. You want to be thinking in terms of aesthetic appeal, sound attenuation, climate resilience, and endurance. This development will, in fact, put a whole new face on a good portion of Beamsville, and it's important that we have a strong vision for what that face is going to look like. What we see with many municipalities leading the way in urban design is that they will actually set out some specific guidelines for building materials. Oftentimes, the municipality will delineate what is considered the appropriate primary and secondary building materials, and sometimes even list the ones they discourage. So we certainly encourage the municipality and encourage Lincoln to take a look at some of these other examples before you make your final decisions on this plan. Guelph is doing some particularly innovative things in some of their secondary plans that are currently underway, and so we encourage you to have a look at those. And of course, we always encourage the design guidelines to require that materials be carried around all the facings of a building, and we were certainly glad to see that policy has also been included here. We do, however, think that it's important for the municipality to exercise the power that you have through the Planning Act over matters of exterior design, so you can have a say in what those buildings look like, what those buildings are made of, because if you don't put that into the secondary plan, you really don't have that say. Some consideration should also be given to the tower components of the taller buildings. Right now, you've talked a fair bit in the plan about podium and tower models, and many studies have in fact shown that when you have high percentages of glass on your tower versus other materials, that actually puts a great deal of strain on your HVAC systems, lo and behold, as they try to regulate the temperatures in the buildings. That results in more energy being consumed and creates greater demands on the systems, and needless to say, also increases the carbon footprint. And given that a great deal of these buildings will not actually be built for many years, paying some particular attention to the impact of climate change is something that we strongly recommend. The GO train is certainly going to bring a lot of exciting changes to Niagara and to Beamsville, and we really urge you to make the most of those changes through strong, comprehensive policy that focuses on exterior design, along with all of the terrific things that you've got worked into the plan to date. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. Are there any questions from committee? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
For those who would like to speak this evening, I'd like to mention that this is not a question and answer session. Rather, all comments tonight will be part of the submission and considered for the final recommendation staff report. So please keep your comments brief and to the point. Is there anybody present this evening who wishes to address the draft Beamsville GO Transit Station secondary plan? If yes, please come forward and state your name, your address, and spell your surname for the record. Is there anyone present wishing to speak to this secondary plan this evening? Please come up and state your name and your address and spell your last name for the record.
JD knew I wasn't going to shut up if I My name is Carol Phillips, Phillips, at 5083 Park Avenue, right near the arena. Great idea. The one concern I had personally is that because it's on the outskirts of town for the most part, people are still going to have to use their cars to get there. Or they're going to walk, it's a long walk, or they're going to bike. Now I see there's a lovely painted line where there was a bicyclist on that rendering. And what I've always thought would be great to have, but the cities, I don't think we can do this in the cities, but Ontario Street might be the perfect place to try this because it's wide enough, especially the closer you get down to Green Lane, is to have a separate and buffered dedicated bicycle lane, much like you see in cities like Copenhagen, so that our kids aren't on their bikes either on the sidewalk or they're not on that little, whatever it is, 2-foot wide piece of pavement with a paint line between them and a transport heading down to the highway. So it's just a straight line. Ontario Street is a straight line. This might be the perfect time and place for the region to start experimenting with different types of active transportation and infrastructure. It seems an easy, but I think it seems an easier place to try that and to experiment with that type of cycle path rather than simply adding a shoulder and painting a line. So that's my suggestion.
Thank you. Are there any questions from, go ahead, Councillor Foster.
I do have pictures from Copenhagen if you don't know what I'm talking about.
Please stay, there's questions, ma'am.
Hi.
Hi.
I just wanted to make comment. I think your suggestion is good, and I think it has to be added in with the rest. And as a municipality, we have a number of things that I think have to be thought through with this. Lincoln Avenue, for instance, what's going to happen with it? And we also have that development that's going on around the Conkle Creek as well that's going to go on. So I think there's a number of options that we can look at with that, but I think actually throwing out and suggesting Ontario Street as well is a good idea, so thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. Are there, Councillor Bernay?
Thank you, Chair Thompson. To your comment, I appreciate your comment. Thank you very much. You might be aware, you might not, so I'll just mention that in September of 2016, we launched active transportation here in Lincoln. We have an active transportation committee now that's been working for about the last 15 months. And I can assure you that at every one of our monthly meetings, this is a topic front and center, especially now with the DSBN announcement of the new high school over on Durham Road and the approach into the roundabout and how we're going to move people.
Sidewalks would be great to the roundabout and the Y.
So I want to thank you for your comment. I can tell you that it is on the radar of Public Works here at the town, as well as discussions we're having at the region. So thank you very much for your comment.
Sure.
Thank you. Are there any more questions or comments from the committee? No. Thank you very much. Is there anybody else wishing to speak to this secondary plan open meeting tonight? Please come forward. State your name, address, and spell your last name, please.
Thank you. Marlene McBride, McBride at 5503 Green Lane. I may have missed it in here, but I understand from the rendering that Green Lane will be projected to be widened from 2 lanes to, well, multiple lanes. So my question is, and I may have missed it, but has an environmental assessment been looked at for right at 30 Road, which is where I am, the bridge that goes over 30 Creek? Right now, my understanding is that it can only be 2 lanes because of the negative environmental impact of widening the bridge right there. So I'm just wondering if somebody could speak to that.
Walter, did you want to respond to that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we haven't looked that far down Green Lane at this point with an environmental assessment.
But the widening of the road will be going right through to Durham, I would think. It would make sense.
That hasn't been evaluated yet, so we will look at that, and that's a good comment.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you. Any questions or comments from the committee? Thank you. Please state your name, address, and spell your last name.
Hello, Jane Murray, 5125 Meadowwood Lane, Murray. I like the idea of the GO train, as many of our neighbors do as well. What my concern is, and what I'm asking really, is about the development behind our street between Meadowwood Lane and Green Lane. There's a large rural area there with vineyards and fields, and whether that has been rezoned for residential development. And if that's the case, well, that's kind of our concern. I'm speaking from the point of view of a few of our neighbors and wondering where that direction is going in terms of the development of that land as a result of the GO train development too.
Okay.
If that is clear.
Ms. Dale?
Through you, Mr. Chairman. The town right now has very specific urban area boundaries. So the secondary plan is concentrating on what can happen within the urban area boundaries. So the area that is roughly south of Green Lane, up to Lincoln Avenue, and sort of the end of where the development is right now, those lands are within what they refer to as the Greenbelt Plan area and designated as specialty crop. It's very, very difficult to have those change. So even if it was to change, the first step is it's given the policies that are currently in place right now at the provincial level, it's a very, very difficult mountain to climb. But even if those lands were to be developed in the future, first it has to be looked at a regional level, because the region is responsible in this area for allocating growth to all of the municipalities. But right now there's fairly specific policies that don't allow you to expand your urban area boundaries onto what they call specialty crop lands.
Okay, so at this point, then, those lands are not intended for development for residential, then?
Yes, you are correct.
Thank you.
Are there any questions from committee? Just as a reminder, this isn't a question and answer period. It's certainly, we do want to hear your comments and concerns, and that's what this evening is about. So is there anybody else wishing to speak to this application this evening? Or this secondary plan this evening? Please come forward and state your name, your address, and spell your last name.
Hello, my name is Jody Candiotis, Kandiotis. I'm actually a Vineland resident. My property butts up against the tracks, and wondering if there's any future plans for a Vineland station. If anybody can answer or put that forward.
Yeah. Nothing that we're aware of at this time, but certainly that's that question will be brought forward in the report. So.
Great.
Any questions from committee? Thank you. Anybody else wishing to speak to this secondary plan this evening?
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. I had promised myself I wasn't going to say anything, but after hearing what I've heard thus far, I have to. Ontario Street is not a testing ground for whatever you people have in mind.
Mr. Labatt, could you spell your name?
I'm sorry,
address?
yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Paul Labatt, Labate, 4556 Ontario Street, Beamsville. As I may repeat, I wasn't going to speak tonight because I didn't want to say anything negative. However, I can't say anything positive about this. Reason being is no one has done any studies on Ontario Street, period, regarding traffic, regarding the way things are going. I had complaints after complaint about speeding and so forth. Nobody comes forth. I talked to the mayor. I talked to councillors. I talked to everybody I can possibly can. I talked to the police department to see what they can do about the speeding issues, and nothing is done about it. Now, some lady came here and she wants bike lanes on Ontario Street. Ontario Street is a dangerous zone.
Ma'am?
I'm sorry, I
we don't.
remember your name. I apologize, Ms. Carroll. Okay? Ontario Street does not need bike lanes. What it needs is a little bit of law and order. Okay? And as far as the GO station is concerned, the best place for the GO station would be, like the previous speaker said, in Vineland. Because that way, the town has the opportunity to go halfway and be at the proper setting, versus that people who are living in Jordan have to drive all the way to Beamsville to get to the train. It's insane. Everything else is fine as far as I'm concerned. Thank you. I apologize if I offended anybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Just as a reminder, there should be no engagement from the gallery to the speaker. The speaker is just brought forward to give comment to this secondary plan. So please go ahead and spell your name and say your name and your address.
Hi, good evening. My name is Zuzana Kolarikova, which is Kollarikova, and it's 5113 Meadowwood Lane in Beamsville. And I guess it's just kind of a question and a suggestion like everybody else. I know that the high-rise building that has been approved on Green Lane are 10 stories building. And my question, and I'm for development, and I'm excited about the GO station, but do we have to go really this high? Is there a chance to change it to 8? Because all of these buildings probably gonna have a, like a shopping area below, you know? So is there a chance that this building would be lower for the development? Because that's the part of affecting when we are developing the GO and all the planning.
Okay, so the zoning for that actual property has been approved for 8, or the secondary plan does allow for 10. So,
Okay, but it's 8 plus the area below, so it is gonna be 9 or 10 at the end
so
anyway.
your comments will be entered into the record for this evening's meeting.
Okay,
with
thank you.
regards to the height.
Thank you.
Any questions from committee? Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anybody else wishing to speak this evening to this secondary plan? Please say your name and your address and spell it.
Tony Van Ness, 4664 Ontario Street. That little block in the center there on Ontario Street, that's my property. So you'll probably build all around me eventually. The only concern I have is employment land. And Lincoln has very little employment land, industrial land. I hope that the town of Lincoln considers developing or allowing more employment land. Because if you're taking away 11 acres of employment land, and what happens is you have no employment land hardly left in Lincoln. And I think the town of Lincoln should really seriously consider if there's any possibility of extending some employment land, right? And that would be my concern, because if they build this, I'd probably have to move away, right? Because of the nature of my business with outside storage. And there's no other place to go in Lincoln. So that would be a concern for all my employees that live and work at my place. And that, you know, I don't know if this plan is 5 or 10 years from now, right? It's hard to say, but, and it's hard to say if it goes through. So I just want to bring my concern of that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. CAO Kirkopoulos.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to take an opportunity to address Mr. Van Ness's statement around employment lands and just highlight that we are undergoing an employment land needs study right now, and I think there's concurrence around the table from a staff perspective at this particular point that we need to ensure that we do address our employment lands needs around the community, and the work that we're currently going through will do that, and we'll identify what are the future needs, and so there will be a consultation and an outreach to all our businesses. So I did want to highlight that while you're here, sir.
Thank you. Is there anybody else wishing to speak to this secondary plan this evening? Please come forward. Please don't forget to state your name and address and spell your last name.
Fred Vandervelde, V-A-N-D-E-R-V-E-L-D-E, 4219 Mountain View Road. My question would be, Grimsby has the parking lot for the GO station designated on Greenbelt lands, and here we are in Beamsville, and Mr. Van Ness triggered this concern of mine. We don't have any employment lands. Grimsby has located their parking lot for the GO station on Greenbelt lands, which at the meeting I attended in Grimsby, somebody from the province said infrastructure supersedes Greenbelt, and they have no problem with that. And yet here we are in Lincoln placing a parking lot on employment lands, which does not employ a lot of people. And I think it's valuable land that we should leave for employment lands and locate perhaps the parking lot for the GO station. And I don't want to speak out of turn here, but there's a piece of Greenbelt land just to the west of the parking lot and owned by private individuals, of course, but could be used for that purpose.
Okay, thank you, sir. Any questions or comments from committee? Thank you. Is there anybody else wishing to speak to this secondary plan this evening? Is there anybody else here wishing to speak to the secondary plan this evening? Is there anybody else here wishing to speak to this secondary plan this evening? Mayor? Mayor, would you like to speak briefly?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, we have pretty much a full house here tonight, and I've been speaking with councillors as they've been coming to meet with me about their own priorities, and I've been telling them about some urban design work that was done by the region for us, and it's really a vision of what Ontario Street looks like right now, and all of the considerations that are there. And I think it's very important for you to hear a little bit more about that tonight, so that you know that we're just not looking at the straight run down Ontario Street, but the other Lincoln Avenue was mentioned by Councillor Foster, but certainly Bartlett Road, and how we plan to bring this all together, because it is very important for us to do planning for a much bigger part of our community. So I asked Mr. Kirkopoulos to bring that diagram with him, and he's prepared to speak to it with your indulgence, Mr. Chairman.
Absolutely. Please go ahead, Mr. CAO.
Through Mr. Chairman, likely something that both myself and Associate Director Matt Bruder, who's sitting to my left, can also speak to, as he was very involved with regional staff. I think just to give a little bit of an overview, we've been working with regional staff over the last number of months to identify and undergo an Ontario Street visioning exercise, something that this council has wanted us to look at. And I say Ontario Street right now, but that doesn't mean we're not looking at other streets and partnering with the region. And we really segmented that work into three parts. One, looking at the existing conditions, and this goes all the way from the QEW up to King Street. The second, what are some of the opportunities? So tonight we heard, Mrs. Phillips, you highlighted bike lanes. Mr. Labatt, you highlighted, some of the other issues that you see. We looked at what are the opportunities. We looked at the assets along Ontario Street and tried to highlight them on a map where the potential GO Transit station is located. What are some of the gateway features, or those things that people look at gateways when they head into downtowns? And then we looked at areas of focus and what does that future visioning look like as we move forward. What are some of the land uses along Ontario Street, which is one of our, what we call our intensification corridors. We've got a lot of commercial on one side that is very haphazard and scattered. We've got residential on the other side that is similarly different size lots and different size buildings. So we went through an exercise and are still going through that exercise, and we'll be sharing with council a lot of the details around that Ontario Street visioning work. It is something we want to also go to the community with, talk to you about it, and like I said, it includes everything from the QEW and what are some of the needs we have at the bottom, all the way up to King Street, and looking at some of the feeders that come off of Ontario Street. So whether that be our Beamsville District Secondary School precinct, whether that be some of the other areas along Green Lane and some of the changes that are happening there. So I think, the point in, before I turn it over to Matt, I think the point in that is a lot of the things we are looking at and exploring are how do we make it more walkable? How do we look at speed and some of those issues? We've launched a pilot project around transit, for example. So how do we look at where we want transit and connecting to these GO stations and the GO bus service? How do we look at bike lanes and moving people around the community? And so there's a whole, it's an exercise that's going to continue and become a lens for the decisions we make. So I can answer any questions that committee may have, but maybe Matt's got something he wants to add.
Yeah, just that's a pretty good summary of the visioning exercise. It's more of the goal is, we want to look at, there's a lot of things going on in terms of this particular secondary plan, like Mr. Kirkopoulos mentioned. We also have the transportation master plan, the townwide master plan that's being undertaken currently. So there's a lot of initiatives underway, and this is a proactive way of looking at this particular corridor, as it's very important in terms of what we can provide as a sense of identity coming coming into the Beamsville core area from the highway, looking at certain pieces of land, that may be underutilized. Maybe there's potential for an enhanced use down the road as redevelopment occurs. So it's really, kind of looking at attracting investment in the area, and these are some of the things that we want to carry forward in a proactive nature as we, envision a long-term plan for the area.
Thank you very much. Anything else, Mayor?
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to say that this work was done off the corner of the desk of the urban planner. And so as a community, we consider this part of our investment in the region through our taxes. And it's a very extensive study that he did. And the plan is to extend this to include King Street in Beamsville in the business improvement area, and also in Vineland, because we really need to bring all of our community pieces together. So there was no consultant hired for this. It was indirectly supported through our tax dollars to the region. So I'm very, very pleased that Khaldun did this work. It was a great job.
Thank you very much. Seeing that there are no more speakers this evening for Report PL 18-12, I declare this public hearing closed. Are there any questions from committee members respecting Report PL 18-12, the draft Beamsville GO Station Transit Station Secondary Plan? Councillor McMillan.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not a member of the committee, so I will wait after the committee members have the opportunity to ask their questions. Go ahead.
You can go ahead, yeah, okay. Absolutely.
One of the concerns I had about the particular plan is that right now there is only one railroad track that runs through Lincoln. There's two in Grimsby, and it goes down to one, and then it goes back to two when you get to St. Catharines. So that has I would assume then that for the GO train, we're going to have two rails. That would impact the whole town, not just the Beamsville area. Is it fair to assume that CN has enough property that they own in order to accommodate the two rails, or will there be necessity to talk to the abutting landowners?
Okay, Kathleen, go ahead.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, at one time there actually were two sets of tracks running down the CN line, and what they did, might be about 10 or 15 years ago, is they did rip up one set of tracks. So there actually is property room within the right-of-way to put that second set of tracks back.
So CN does have enough property because there were two tracks there at one time. Okay, that's fine. And because it would, if that was not the case, there would certainly be an impact on the budding landowners. But I'm glad to hear that there is the necessary land there in order to make that change. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments about the report from committee members? So I have a motion moved by Mayor Easton and seconded by Councillor Timmers that for the reasons outlined in PL 18-12, it's hereby recommended that this report regarding the draft Beamsville GO Transit Station Secondary Plan, PLOPA 20180020, be received for information, and that a recommendation report be prepared upon receipt of all agency and public comments. Any questions to the motion? Your pleasure on the motion? Thank you. That motion is carried. So any questions that arise will be dealt with in the final reports, and staff will be following up as required. Just going to take a couple-minute break here to get organized. Thank you. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to get started again. Ladies and is it on? Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to get started again. So we're into Delegations Committee. We have Angela Winamici representing IBI Group to speak to report PL 18-13 regarding the proposed revisions to the Cherry Heights draft plan subdivision by Agrabah Ontario Incorporated. Thank you for coming forward already, Angela. Committee members, if you press the input buttons on your monitors, you'll see the presentation. Please go ahead.
Okay. Good evening. As you said, Angela Bonamici from IBI Group, and I'm the agent on behalf of the owners for the Cherry Heights subdivision. We are here requesting approval of our red line revision to the approved draft plan. So before you is the approved draft plan, which was comprised of 51 singles and 226 townhouse units, which was a total of 277 units. This plan received draft approval and was given the conditions of approval to be met. So we began clearing those conditions through the final and detailed engineering design, and part of clearing those conditions was the archaeological cleanup of the land. All of this is going very well, and then we discovered a major problem. Artifacts of archaeological significance were discovered in 4 specific areas within this subdivision. Here are some examples of what was found. Here's some more examples. So it was discovered that these 4 areas that are represented as red rectangles on the draft plan have large amounts of archaeological significance within them. So many that it is actually not economically feasible to clean up those rectangles. Therefore, this resulted in a redesign of our subdivision. Basically, what we're doing is the 4th block at the top, we will clean because it wouldn't work otherwise. And the majority of the 3 rectangles will remain intact, and we are having it turned into a parkland. Total area for this park would be well over 5%. However, when we subtract the areas of archaeological significance, we get a net area of 3.6% for parkland. We understand that the town already has upgrades in order for Ashby Park. And basically, because we don't have we only have net area of 3.6% for parkland, we still will have to be required to pay cash in lieu to make up the 1.4% that we don't have. This we will contribute to the upgrades at Ashby Park. As well, our client our client is dedicated to constructing this park on themselves. We came up with a preliminary concept to illustrate the potential of this park. I do want to just say that this concept is just for illustrative purposes and that we can work around the areas of archaeological significance. What we are going to do for this park is collaborate with the 3 Indigenous communities that are affected by the archaeological significance. So this park will have historical context with plaques and other features which pay tribute to these Indigenous communities. The park will be fully usable with significant findings areas, so the 3 areas that are within the park will remain untouched and covered with turf to be virtually undistinguishable to the park. Therefore, the Cherry Heights Park is in a central, good location for the subdivision. The park makes up 5.2%, or over 5.2%, but only 3.6% will be net area that is usable for parkland. We will be working with chiefs from the 3 Indigenous communities to help design an interpretive park. The owners will contribute to the facilities proposed at Ashby Park. As well, these 2 parks will complement each other. We're not looking to, whatever facilities are going into Ashby Park, we're not going to duplicate them in this park. They will complement rather than duplicate. And ultimately, this park will be a perfect example of collaborating to solve a significant development problem. Therefore, we respectfully ask that you grant us draft approval to a red line revision. And if you have any questions, I'll try to answer them.
Thank you very much, Angela. Are there any questions from committee? Councillor Timmers?
Thank you, Chair Thompson. Through you to the delegation around the park. You're saying it's going to be an interpretive park in consultation with the chiefs. What exactly is that going to look like? Is that just open space?
We haven't decided yet. We haven't had our meeting with the communities, but we're thinking like more of a passive park, gazebos, some plaques that like you walk through and you can read about, I guess, the Indigenous communities. Basically, we haven't had an opportunity to sit down with them and see what they would like, and our landscape architects haven't either, but it's going to try and be something that is like a learning park, but also kind of a passive enjoyment area, not really an active park at all.
Okay, I just wasn't sure with the term, what that meant exactly. Yeah. And just one other question, if I may. I'm just wondering about the artifacts that were discovered. What's done with those? Where do they go?
My understanding is they mark them up, like put them, document them, and then they're put into storage, the ones that are found. Yeah.
I was just wondering, like with our local museum, if that, I don't know, if anyone, what happens, I was just curious.
Yeah.
So maybe we need to find out a little more about what they do with them. But
I can ask our consultant, but John can answer if that helps.
John, if you'd like to come forward, you can certainly do that.
Thank you, Chair Thompson. Through consultation with the Ministry of Tourism, Culture and Sport, there is no way for the community to get, we had asked about the finds that we're finding. There is a lot of historical data, especially tied to, historical artifacts, tied to Woodburn Cottage and the Osborns. There was significant finds dating back to, the history behind it is quite interesting. They found a lot of artifacts belonging to Mr. Osborn himself, and through the artifacts that they found, they've actually dated back the history of how he ended up passing away, and the fact that the artifacts were found in a certain area. They were all put together, they were all burned. They've discovered that he did die from tuberculosis because that was the standard procedure back then. Everything that he owned was put in one burn pile and everything was burned. And there's shaving razors, medicine bottles. There's some pictures of some of the medicine bottles and the razors. So for us as the land developers, we're not entitled to any of the artifacts that are found on the site. They belong to the Government of Ontario and the Ministry of Tourism, Culture and Sport. They can, if we put in a requisition, we can get them on loan, but they don't belong to us. They actually found a dime from 1816, and I made a joke that it would be great because it helps pay for some of this stuff, and they said it's not yours, it's ours, but we'll loan it to you. So any of the artifacts that are found, even the indigenous items that were found, and there's quite a fair bit of them, right now the standard procedure from the MTCS is to catalog, document, and store these materials for time immemorial. So Golder, who is our archaeological team, has warehouses upon warehouses upon warehouses filled with these materials. And if we do get them on loan from the MTCS, we have to display them. So it is in our agenda and it is in our future works that once all the reports are done and accepted by the MTCS, which we're down to our last one now that we're waiting for, we would like to approach the Historical Society and the museum and see if there is any interest to any of the artifacts that we did find.
Very good. Thank you very much for that information, John. I appreciate it.
I'll just stay here in case there's any more.
Thank you. Councillor Foster?
Yes, thank you. First of all, it's interesting, this whole thing. I do give you credit in the design of what's going on. You've been fairly agile in what it is that you've done to revamp this and do what it is that you want to do. I'm just curious, like, it was a financial decision not to go and do this any further, but like how expensive would it have been to go and actually, do the
You really wanna
quote-unquote?
know?
Yeah, actually, I would.
When the accounts were first established, there was a determination that 11,500 holes would have to be hand dug, screened, and sifted for artifacts over that area, which would have equated to 30 archaeologists for 6 months digging and screening. And there was no other alternative to machine digging, using any machine sifting or trommeling or anything like that. And in order to keep going through the winter, if we wanted to proceed that way, we would have to tent the whole entire area with like big circus tents, 50 meters wide by 90 meters long. And the budget came in at $5 million. And so by doing it this way, we've lost 10 building lots, which equates to about $1 million worth of lost revenue. It's going to be about a $600,000 archaeological undertaking, plus the development of the park and the development and the cash in lieu for the balance of the thing. So we're figuring it's going to be about a $2 million ordeal as opposed to a $5 million ordeal. And the biggest decision wasn't the financial aspect of it. It was the timing. It was the fact that these 6 months would have dragged us out beyond the point of, because, as everybody knows, that we've already had the sale of the houses. The first phase is sold out. There's commitments made to have people in by a certain date and a certain time. So that weighed heavily on if this would have happened a year ago, if we would have run into this issue, then there would have been some consideration to wait, not do it over the winter time, which would have saved the need for rental of the tents and everything else. So it was more of the financial burden was a deciding factor, but time was probably the biggest deciding factor on it. So.
Thank you. Now I understand.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor McPherson and then Councillor Petrino.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you to the delegation. And I commend you. What I really like about this is the partnership with the Aboriginal community and recognizing them and honoring them in many ways. I leaned over and asked Kathleen a question that she quickly told me we have to go into in camera for. I mean, I see percentages, but I'm interested in dollars, and what kind of dollars are being allocated to Ashby versus, what we've got there now. But that's not a question I can ask. So, but just credit, commend you for the creativity, and understand the loss and sympathize with the loss, but yet you're going to make some lemonade here.
Yeah, that's what they say. Right?
There you go.
When they hand you lemons, every once in a while I want to scream, give me some cherries, but that's okay. I'll take the lemons.
Councillor Petrino, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And at this price, John, I would say it's more limoncello than it is lemons. But you know what? Angela, your last statement on your presentation summed it up. Like, you've taken the best of a bad situation and turned it around, working with 4 different groups, creating, a passive park that pays homage to, the Indigenous groups, providing now 2 connective links to the storm retention pond, and I can see this as a bigger picture, a part of our active transportation network, and linking the trail that's coming down through Ashby, through the couple walkways to the park. It's just dynamite, and I mean, we will add this in our future activities, because at our active transportation committee meeting last Thursday night, we've vowed to have a cycling event as part this June as part of Cycle Month, and I was going to go around and do the trails, and I think this would be a key additive when it's up and done, and the addition still the parkland dedication money, which will go to Ashby Park, which, to Councillor Timmer's question, is more of an active park. There's a playground there. There's a basketball court. We can put more of those active playground elements, and that was always the plan anyway, is to take those parkland dollars and shift them to the bigger park where that was. So, I mean, we're getting a little bonus here. So I thank you for developing this plan and working with staff and working with the Indigenous community. And you know what? Good things come to those who wait. And Johnny, when I asked you for that lot for the house for the priest, and I said, you know what, all that help, you need all that help at some point. So, you know what, you cashed a few here. So good on you.
Well, and thank you, Councillor. Through you, Mr. Chair, there is talk of, I mean, although we call it a passive park, there is talk, IBI has brought a very innovative design element to the park, that it's a company that they've worked with before that does playground structures that don't look like your typical playground structures. They're not your swings and your slides. They're more interactive sculptures that, I mean, there's great, and again, we haven't brought this forward to the Indigenous communities yet, but there is the opportunity for some activities. I don't think it's going to be your typical swings and slides, but it will be. They do a lot of climbing structures. If they do slides, they don't do your typical ladder up the back and slide. They do it integrated into the existing structure. So if you have rolling hills, they put a slide in the side and you climb up the back on the actual mound of dirt and then slide down the front on a slide. So there is the opportunity. Their elements and their design are so unique that what we want to do is we want to bring it to them and see if each Indigenous community would like to design through themselves some feature that we could then incorporate, whether it's a climbing structure, they've got all kinds of different ideas, and they're not afraid to tackle anything, and IBI has worked with them before, so we don't want to let the cat out of the bag yet, but we are meeting with all three of the Indigenous communities and their design teams and their archaeologists to try and see if we can do something truly unique with this park to make it not only a learning park for them, for the communities, but more to stay towards their mentality of gathering places. So with a bigger gazebo where the community can get together on a Sunday and barbecue and do whatever, something like the big gazebo that's up at Lions Park, something like that where people can gather and meet, and that's more the sense of community that they want to bring to these parks, and we want to be those people that set the bar for the other developers, because we don't, we could have very easily skirted the issues. We could have, bulldozed everything like other developers have in this area in the past, and we don't want to be those people. We want to be the guys that, we sat down with them, we ran into this issue, we brought them down to the office, we sat down and said, okay, here's our issues, here's your issues, we need to resolve this. So
thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments.
Thank you. Any more comments or questions from committee? Seeing none, thank you very much for presenting this evening. I have a report, PL 18-13, proposed revisions to the Cherry Heights draft plan subdivision by Agribur Ontario Incorporated. Kathleen, did you want to briefly speak to the parkland dedication?
Sure. Through you, Mr. Chairman. I think where this kind of starts as well is there's quite a bit of direction in provincial policies that when you run into these issues, you have to consider the interests of the Indigenous communities when you have these archaeological issues. The one thing to keep in mind is as part of this, the developers have actually agreed to develop the park at their cost. It'll be in consultation within this particular development with the Indigenous communities, as well as it'll also be in consultation with our Community Services Department. So it's really going to be like a three-way partnership between the town, the Indigenous communities, and the developer. So when staff did look at this, we felt a reasonable approach was we really shouldn't be counting what I'm going to call the areas that have the archaeological significance as part of parkland, because we know that those areas are you're not going to be able to do a lot, but there is still room to do, some features within this park. So they will still have to pay a partial cash in lieu payment. Approximately 1.4%. That money could be put towards future improvements in Ashby Park. The reason we don't talk about a dollar figure about what the cash in lieu payment is at this time is as part of any subdivision process, whenever there's a cash in lieu payment required, there has to be a proper appraisal done to determine what the value is, and then the developer has the opportunity to review that appraisal, and there's going to be some negotiation back and forth. In the end, there will be a future report to committee and council with all of these details. But at this point, we really can't talk about what the dollar figure might be for the cash in lieu, because we have to have a proper appraisal done.
Thank you very much for that explanation. Hopefully that clarifies that for committee. Does anybody have any questions to the report? No? So I have a motion moved by, wow. Councilor McPherson and seconded by Councilor Timmers. For reasons outlined in PL 18-13, it's hereby recommended.
Is there not a big fat P on the front of that? Don't you see that?
One, that the modifications to draft plan of subdivision PL sub 2015-0042 by Agribur Ontario Incorporated to permit lands to be conveyed to the town for parkland purposes be approved in accordance with the plan outlined in Appendix B, subject to the revised conditions outlined in Appendix C. 2, that the park block be rezoned to an open space OS zone, and that the subdivision agreement include provisions which require the owner to develop the Cherry Heights Extension Park at their expense and to the satisfaction of the town, and that the owner's cash in lieu payment be directed to future improvements in Ashby Park. Any questions to the motion? Committee's pleasure on the motion? Motion's carried. Are there any councillor inquiries this evening? Just wanted to let you know that all motions from this evening's meeting will be presented to council for final approval at its meeting of March 5th, 2018. Following council approval and enactment of any bylaws that may be necessary, the town's decision will be complete and the notice will be issued in accordance with the Planning Act. Are there any notices of motion this evening? Are there any other announcements this evening? There's no closed session items this evening's agenda. Being no further business, I'm calling this meeting adjourned at 8:25.
Who's that? Who's in it? Oh, it's a Trump star or something?